everyone. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Welcome again to the Empowering Neurologist. You know, it's been said that into each life some rain must fall, and we really do have a choice to make in terms of how our early life and even later life experiences continue to inform us or not. And that is the subject of our program today. We're going to be looking at a new book called The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child by Tana Amen. And it is an incredible story of how Tana was able to deal with both the way that she was being informed by her early life experiences that she will talk about today, as well as some of the challenges she had later in life, in her life, like cancer. So, you know, she's going to explore this notion of a virtually terrifying childhood of abandonment and abuse, her numerous battles with cancer and depression, and as she describes it, a never-ending fight to be valued for more than her outward appearance, and how these things virtually conspired to rob her of her voice and the healthy future that she felt she deserved and did deserve. I'll tell you a little bit about Tana Amen. She is a New York Times bestselling author. She was a neurosurgical intensive care unit trauma nurse, and she is a world-renowned fitness and health expert. She has won the hearts of millions with her simple yet effective strategies that can help anyone optimize their lifestyle and win their battles in the attempt to develop a strong body, mind, and spirit. As such, she is a second-degree black belt in Kenpo Karate and also a black belt in Tae Kwon Do. She and her husband, who you've seen on this program multiple times, Dr. Daniel Amen, have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. Again, the relentless courage of a scared child. I think that there's a lot to learn here, and there's a lot that will, I think, strike home with many of you. So looking forward to this interview. Tana, it's so wonderful to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perlmutter. It's always an honor. It's always a pleasure.
Well, we did an Instagram Live the other day, and it was a very, very special moment, and I appreciate that. I said in the introduction that into each life some rain must fall, and that you know, what really matters is how we choose to allow those early life and later life events, how we choose to allow them to inform us moving forward or not. And gosh, there's so many places we can go with that. But I would like to start just by asking you, so you wrote this wonderful book. Again, I'll hold it up for everybody because I did in the intro as well. And why now? What provoked this to happen right now?
You know, it's so interesting. I don't believe in coincidence. It's a fascinating time. We're living in this really challenging time for everybody. I mean, it's life changed on a dime. People are struggling a lot at this time. And I couldn't have known that when I got this book deal and I decided to write this. I felt like I was being nudged. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling that you feel like it's time to tell a story. And for a while, my husband, Dr. Daniel Amen, had been nudging me to do this, but I didn't feel like it was time. I needed my daughter to be of a certain age. I needed her to be able to understand. And then all of a sudden, I felt like it was time. I had a woman come up to me and she said, you know, I pray every day that God will do for me what he's done for you, that if you can do it, I can do it. And I thought, you know, I haven't really told people much about my life. She was talking about just a very superficial thing. And I thought, you know, maybe if somebody can benefit from this, I should do this. This is something I should do. And then sure enough, COVID happened. And I thought, how interesting life is. How interesting life is that this would be the time that I would decide to share this.
Well, interestingly, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but the real epiphany or a transition moment for you, I think you were actually a guest lecturer at people who were drug addicted and alcohol addicted. And you were describing yourself standing in front of these people with perfect lipstick and high heels and looking like you had it all together.
Yeah.
And you didn't, I guess, quite have a panic attack, but it seems from your description that things started to fall apart for you mentally, and it really pushed you into opening up. There was comments in there about, I think you asked the audience, how many people are judging me?
Right.
And nobody would raise their hand. And you said, You said, I'm judging you. And then you said, now how many people are judging me? And people started to raise their hands. So walk us through that whole experience, that moment. And am I correct in assuming that was really a transitional moment for you?
It was. I mean, so it was an epiphany actually about, I mean, that's actually where the title of the book comes from. So the relentless courage of a scared child, it really comes from there. There's a difference between knowing that you need to get help and taking the time to get that help, but then sharing it with the world. Those were two very different things. So I had actually sort of come to the realization and the revelation that I needed to get help for myself prior to that. But the idea that I was ever going to share it with the world, that was not something I ever entertained. And so I had built this wall, this facade, and I always thought, as long as I look like I've got it together on the outside, nobody needs to know this. So nobody needs to see this part of me. And I was very good at keeping it all together on the outside. I always covered it up with accomplishments. I thought if I was together enough, if I was accomplished enough, if I had enough makeup, hair, the right clothes, and I had written a book called The Omni Diet, which was all about nutrition and fitness, and so that was my calling card, was to look fit and accomplished. And so I show up at this rehabilitation center, one of the largest in the country, actually. And there's a couple hundred people who are recovering. And I'm getting up on stage and I realized how judgmental I am. And I don't like it. I'm a nurse, I'm educated, and I'm fighting with myself thinking, how am I ever going to teach these people about gluten and dairy and insulin resistance when they're jonesing for a pipe or a needle? Like this thought crosses my mind. And I realize how sort of angry I still am with people who do drugs and don't follow rules. And I'm smart enough to know that it stems from my childhood, because there was so much chaos and addiction and mental illness in my family that I just hadn't recovered from, that I was still very judgmental towards these people. And when I brought this, I thought, all of a sudden I have this epiphany that I can't reach these people. And so I say a prayer to myself. I thought, I've got to get past this. And so I start praying to myself, you need to get past this. And I thought, I need to set my own pride aside. I need to if one person can just hear something through this lecture, like help me just get through this lecture. And so I start praying. And all of a sudden I look out to the audience and I see a bunch of scared children like I was. And that's where the title came from. So I realized in that moment that at some time in our lives, we were all these scared children. Something happened. We were scared children at one point. I don't know why. Some people make different decisions, why they turn right, some turn left, some make different decisions. Why some become, addicted to substances. I don't know. That wasn't my vice, but I certainly had my own vices. But if I could get back to that place before everything went wrong, we could all come together in that time.
Well, you say early on, and you said just now that that your faith and your spirituality really helped pull you through. That even in that moment in front of that audience, that it helped pull you through. And yet, there's not a real religious connotation to your book. So maybe you can help us understand how we can tease apart religion versus being spiritual and having faith.
So for me, I mean, here's the thing. Everybody who is watching right now, anybody who reads my book, they're coming from different places in life, and I understand that. And what my spiritual walk looks like is going to be different from someone else. But the studies are very clear about spirituality or being purposeful. So people who are purposeful and believe in something bigger than themselves live longer, they're happier, and they have less disease, right? So it's really important to believe in something beyond yourself. It's really important to believe that there's something bigger than yourself, because otherwise, when the world turns on a dime like it has right now, we tend to fall apart. So when things are going really badly in the house and the kids will come up to us and they're like, life's not fair. It's not fair. Life is not fair. No one ever told you life was going to be fair. When I worked in the hospital, I saw babies dying every day. Life is not fair. But a better question to take you out of that victim trap is, what are you doing to make the world a better place? So how do you get out of that victim mode? Well, people who believe in something beyond themselves, who actually help other people, they're better. They're not sick as often, and they're full of joy. So for me, my spiritual walk does happen to be about God. For other people, I realized that that's not the case. And my spiritual walk was very rocky because there were lots of mixed messages in my life growing up. So about religion and what God is, and then also being mixed up with drugs and mental illness, and it was messy. It was very messy. So I had to figure that out for myself. But I did. I figured out that for me, that was an important part of my journey. God is huge. It's a huge part of my journey.
I recall a part in the book where I think it was your Uncle Ray. Am I getting that right?
My Uncle Ray was murdered, yeah, in a drug deal gone wrong.
And how you learned about that when you were a child, and how they said that Uncle Ray is now with Jesus, and how that kind of conflicted you and certainly affected you. And it was shortly after that, if I recall, that you began, I don't want to say having visions, but you began having maybe premonitions, or just a sense that other things might be happening. Can you tell us about that?
Um, so my Uncle Ray was murdered when I was 4, and he was murdered in a drug deal gone wrong because of my other uncle, Bob, who was a heroin addict. And so my life was very chaotic growing up. There was lots of chaos, lots of drama, lots of screaming. So what's really interesting is I had a mother who saw visions. She hates the word psychic. She still to this day hates the word psychic, but people would show up at our house. They would want her to tell them stuff about their lives. She didn't like it. She never took money for it. So it's a little weird growing up with someone who's like that in your life. I don't know if anybody watching has had someone like that in their life. I think we have a hard time explaining that. Most of us just in this world, we have a hard time explaining people who have this ability to sort of see things, or whatever it is that you want to call it. But it was weird growing up with that. And then one day I remember, I actually don't remember it, but I feel like it's my own memory because I heard it so many times growing up. But I started to do the same thing, although I don't recall it. My mother is convinced that I started to have those same abilities. And she said that I would start talking about what I saw in my mind's eye when I was about 4. And unfortunately, it was very painful. I would talk about how I would see a blank piece of paper in my mind's eye. And it made me sad because it reminded me of my dad, who never showed up, who never came around. And so I think I sort of buried that, maybe because I remember thinking it was weird having a mom who was like that growing up. I didn't like it. It was odd. So whatever feelings or abilities I may have had, I started to stuff them. But that's an interesting thing when you grow up in a house like that with someone who sees things, who has those abilities, and we can't explain them.
I'm sure that a lot of people are going to resonate with that comment. I mean, a lot of people, I think, don't talk about it, but have a sense of things to come, or as it were, a premonition. Books
Right.
are written on the topic. I think the main thesis is that you had a toxic childhood, a very threatening childhood. And, I believe that the cleavers never existed. And when I say the cleavers, I mean, as in Leave It to Beaver, the perfect, or the Donna Reed show, the perfect
Right.
family, Ozzie and Harriet, I grew up with. We all had our stuff. And I'm sure that most all of our viewers of this podcast right now are thinking back that there were events and that they still hurt.
Yeah.
I can tell you from my perspective that when I dwell on those events, I still can feel the pain. I mean, so we all have that. We're not unique in that regard. But what you offer up in your book is the tools that we can use to contextualize these toxic events, to really reframe our toxic childhood. So what can we begin to tell people, aside from I'm sure we'll go is, yes, you can do it, to start off with, but maybe we can walk through some of the tools that you can give people that can help them break free of having these toxic events continue to exercise such an influence on their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one thing for sure is we can all learn so much from our past, and it's a really important thing to be able to do that. So a lot of people watching, like you said, probably did grow up in environments that were less than ideal. I often tease my husband that he grew up with Leave It to Beaver, and my house was like the Nightmare on Elm Street. So, but even if you did grow up in an environment like that, you just touched on something about how my mother had this gift, and she thought that I had the gift of whether you want to call it, being able to see things, or some people call it psychic, being psychic. I don't think that I had that, but I did develop intuition. And so you could probably speak a lot more on that, Dr. Perlmutter, about, what does intuition mean? Is it the gut brain connection? I don't really know. But I do know that it saved me a lot of times, because when you grow up in those toxic environments, when you grow up in chaos, when you grow up in trauma, it's very important to be able to notice what's happening around you, to be able to read situations. So what I would tell people who are, struggling with being sort of stuck in maybe the trauma, or being stuck in depression because of a past that they grew up with, is you don't know what, how those past circumstances may serve you in the future, how using that pain can become your purpose if you just allow it to.
Oh,
I know.
I need to hear that again. Using that pain can become your purpose.
Yeah.
Well
And
said.
so I wanted to die at one point. I finally it was just too much after going through not just a chaotic childhood, but then being diagnosed with cancer in my 20s. And it kept coming back, having to file for bankruptcy, drop out of school, quit my job. My mother had brain surgery, and I honestly just couldn't see a way out. My life just sort of crumbled around me, and I wanted to die. And the darkness depression was the one thing I went through that was worse than cancer. I could not get out of it. I couldn't see a way out of it. And I just thought I was wasting oxygen on the planet. After that, I started making a series of bad decisions. I was put on a medication that didn't work for me. Prozac just did not work for me. I think for some people it's great. For me, it was not. And I made some bad decisions, had some self-induced trauma for a while. And when I finally came through all of that, I realized that, I can use that. I can either be stuck there, or I can take responsibility for my life. And it was my uncle, the heroin addict, who helped teach me about the word responsibility. And when I began to take responsibility for my life and turn things around, it was powerful, because that worst time in my life, the point where I actually thought that I was a waste of humanity, that I was just wasting oxygen on the planet, became the thing that became my platform and my purpose for helping other people on the planet. Your trauma can be someone else's transformation at another time. And that's just such a powerful thing right now when people are suffering so much. Just please hang in there, because you don't know how you may be able to be that one person who can help someone pull through at another time.
One tool in your toolbox that I think you were really able to take full advantage of, that seemed to work for you, was exercise. You talk about how, there's a lot we can say about exercise. My goodness, we've talked about it so much on the podcast, but let's be specific with you and the state of mind that you were in, how you found exercise, and then what did it do for you?
So for me, when I began exercising, like all things, it can have a dark side or a light side, a very positive or a negative thing. When I first started exercising, I didn't even know it. But sort of intuitively, I started using exercise as a way to control my anxiety. So I was suffering silently with an eating disorder, didn't want to tell anybody, didn't want to deal with it. And I found exercise, and it was this perfect way to control my anxiety. So I began over exercising. So I was using it almost as a way to purge. That's not a good thing. If you're doing that, you should probably get some help. Have someone, help you with more positive ways to help you manage your anxiety. But it was better than the alternative. I will say that. But what I did notice is that exercise really was a way for me to manage anxiety. And through now, even in my 50s, I can use exercise. And now that I do know how to use it in an effective way, in a healthy way, and that I also understand what's going on with my anxiety, and I have other tools in my toolbox as well. Exercise is amazing, because exercise is the one thing that I know of that literally helps with every neurotransmitter that is like, it's incredible. It helps with serotonin, it helps with dopamine, and it helps with endorphins. So no matter what you're struggling with, it helps to balance everything in your brain. It's incredible.
Well, I would guess that I would agree with that fact for many reasons. You keep talking about resilience, at least in the book. Why is resilience so important in terms of what, will there be setbacks? Will there be other challenges? Why do we have to really develop this operating system that allows us to be ready?
So resilience is interesting, and you probably could speak more on this than I can. But I did a little bit of research on it because I've got people in my family members who just crumble under the first sign of stress. They still do. They turn to drugs. They turn to alcohol. They just can't seem to get back on their feet if they get knocked down. And then there are people like my mother who just can't seem to take no for an answer. That woman, no matter what you do, she's going to get back up. She's not going to let you knock her down. And I developed her grit. Like I sort of inherited that grit. So I was always curious, is resilience something we inherit? Is it something we can develop? And I actually think both are true. I think that we inherit some of it. There's some evidence that we inherit it, but then there's also some evidence that we can develop it. And so that's something we can actually work on. And I know for me, one of the things I learned when I learned that word responsibility, it was really, really important for me. It was a light switch moment. So when my uncle looked at me and he said, "How much responsibility are you willing to take for where your life is at?" I was a little confused at first because I'm like, cancer? I can't take responsibility for cancer. I can't take responsibility for my stepdad climbing into bed with me when I was 12. Those are things that were not my fault. And he looked at me and said, "I didn't ask you how much blame you were willing to take. I asked you how much responsibility you would take for where your life is at," meaning the ability to respond. How much ability to respond do you want? And for some reason, it was a light switch moment. And I thought, you know what? I don't want anybody else having more control over my life than I have. I want the ability to respond. I want total outcome. I don't want 50%. I want 100%. I don't need to take the blame, but I can be responsible. And so I turned that around into this exercise, this game that I play with myself. So when things are bad, like right now, like 2020 for most people has just not been a fun year. But rather than going, it's out of control, there's nothing I can do, this is just terrible. When stuff like that happens, because it happens for all of us, instead, now what I do is I look in the mirror and I'm like, what do I get to do? What is the opportunity here? What can I do in this situation? And it immediately puts me in a position of power, in a position of control. It takes me out of the victim role. And I think that's resilience.
Yeah, I've been saying over the years that diversity breeds resilience. Maybe mostly as it relates to the gut bacteria, the microbiome. The more diverse the organisms are, the more resilient you are to confrontations of one form or another. But we can be metaphorical about it or literal about it, and translate that into what you're saying. I think having more tools in your toolbox makes you more resilient to the onslaught of various types of stresses moving forward. So, we talked about exercise. We talked about reframing challenges. What other tools for 2021 can you give us?
So I actually learned that from you, and I never had heard it put that way. And it was so interesting, this idea of diversity of bacteria and diversity in how we do things. And I've often said I'm a person who can't do one thing, so it makes sense to me. So I'm one of those people who can't just do one thing and make everything all right. So I've often said I'm pretty high maintenance when it comes to taking care of my anxiety and taking care of my body and taking care of my mind. So I think of it like 4 circles. At Amen Clinics, we treat people according to 4 circles. Your biology, so what's going on with your brain and your body, your hormones, have you had a head injury, toxic, infections, those types of things. Your psychology, how are you managing your mind? Are you believing every stupid thought you have? Are you disciplining your thoughts? Your social circle, because who you hang out with matters. People are contagious. If you're a recovering alcoholic and you're hanging out in a bar, you're probably not going to stay sober for very long, right? So you need to be surrounding yourself with the right people. And then your spiritual circle, because we already talked about that. What is giving your life meaning and purpose? Purposeful people live longer. So I think of those like tires on a car. So those 4 circles. And if the tires on your car are full and even, your car's going to drive really well. If one of them goes flat, the car, it's not going to drive all that well. It might drive for a little while, but eventually you're going to have to pull over or it's going to crash. But if more than one of those tires goes flat, that car is going to crash. And in my case, they were all flat and the car flipped. So for me, when I'm trying to manage myself, especially at a time that's as stressful as 2020 has been, I am not one of those people who can focus on one circle. I focus on all of them. So my biology, it's diet, it's making sure I exercise. So it's making sure that I'm taking my supplements and keeping my immunity strong. It's my mind, making sure that I'm focusing on what I'm grateful for, focusing on what I can control, not on what I can't control, disciplining my thoughts. It's my social circle. For me, my social circle and my spiritual circle are connected. I cannot watch the news. If I turn the news on, I am screaming at the television and I start thinking about all the negative things in the world that can happen. So instead, I joined an online prayer group and I surround myself with people who are positive and focusing on positive things in the world, because I can't go out and do things right now with a lot of people. So that's what I'm doing to really keep myself grounded. And I have to work on all of them. It's all of those tires.
So the transparency part of our discussion, how does it feel to be so transparent about your life and your experiences, et cetera? I think the answer to the question is that that's part of the mission. If people can learn via your transparency, that goes forward to support the mission in terms of helping others.
Yeah, initially, whenever you're transparent, there is being vulnerable is scary. There's always this fear factor to it. It's like, what are people going to say about me? But the truth is, I came to the conclusion I wasn't put on the planet to be popular. I was put on the planet to make a difference, and it's not other people's job to love me. It's mine. And so when you really do grasp that, there's a freedom to that. So there's this freedom to it. And then what you really realize is that when you are vulnerable, when you put the worst about you out there, it draws people closer to you, contrary to what you would think. It's counterintuitive, but people have a hard time connecting with people they think are perfect. It's just out of their grasp. It's people aren't like that. So when you are vulnerable, all of a sudden they can connect to you. They can relate to you, and that they can actually come close to.
And that's what you revealed real early in the book when you're standing up there giving that talk.
Right. Because when I was out there talking to these people, I was judging them. I was frustrated with them. I was actually irritated that I thought they were judging me. But the truth is they were seeing exactly what I wanted them to see. They were seeing the facade that I took years to build. So why would I be frustrated with them? They were just seeing what I wanted them to see, rather than just the authenticity.
Wow. Well, I'll say that you and your husband are very, very special people. I have a very, very special place in my heart for the both of you. I honor so much what you do and what you will do moving forward. And I think this is going to help an awful lot of people. I got a lot out of it too. And again, we all had our stuff, and to have tools to work through it and to recontextualize how these things inform us day to day is so very valuable. So thank you.
Oh, I so appreciate it, Dr. Perlmutter.
All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks for being on our program.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
What a story. It's, again, the notion of recognizing that we continue to be very much informed by our early life experiences. And we can choose to contextualize those experiences and realize what they are for what they were, and decide that we are no longer going to be at the mercy of the messaging of these experiences or not. We see that Tana Amen did it, and here's the book, Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. So for all of you who may still think that you're having reactions, or that your interpretation of the world around you may be informed perhaps negatively by some early life experiences, I think you'll get a lot out of this book. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Bye for now.